We're always told what we should add to our lives to build resilience. But today, we're going to flip that on its head. We're going to explore what we really need to stop doing. And this is all based on some core principles from a cognitive behavioral therapy manual by the experts at Michigan Medicine. I mean, think about it, right? We hear it all the time. Practice mindfulness, exercise more, eat better. But what if the real key to resilience isn't what you're adding, but what you're subtracting? What if some really common habits are actually working against you, keeping you stuck in this cycle of anxiety? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into. So before we get to the list of things to avoid, we really need to understand what we're up against. Like, how does anxiety get so powerful in the first place? And the source material gives us a super clear model for this. It pretty much always starts in your head. There's some kind of trigger. Could be a big presentation at work, or hey, maybe just some turbulence on a flight. And it sparks this negative, fearful thought. Something like, oh man, I'm gonna totally mess this up, or this plane is definitely going down. And see, that thought isn't just a harmless idea. It actually triggers your body's natural alarm system. We're talking about the fight or flight response. Your heart starts racing, maybe you feel a little dizzy or short of breath. That's the anxious feeling kicking in. It feels awful, but as the manual points out, it's not actually dangerous. And here's the absolute crucial part. To get away from that terrible feeling, we do something, we act. But that very action is often the thing that guarantees the anxiety is going to come back even stronger next time. It creates this vicious feedback loop. The source material calls these habits anxiety fuel. And it's such a perfect metaphor, right? Every single time we do one of these reactive habits, we're not putting out the fire of anxiety. We're literally pouring gasoline on it. We're teaching our brain that, yep, that initial fear was totally correct and we can't handle it. So what is this fuel exactly? Okay, so let's get right into the list. We're going to start with 3 specific behaviors. So these are physical things you do that directly feed that anxiety fire. All right, this is the big one. It feels so natural to just stay away from things that make us anxious, whether it's people, places, or certain situations. And yeah, it brings immediate relief, but it comes at a huge long-term cost. The source gives a perfect example. A student drops a class to avoid a presentation. Sure, he gets relief today, but he's also just taught his brain that public speaking is a legitimate, terrifying threat. And so each time he avoids it, his world gets a little bit smaller and that fear just gets bigger and bigger. Number 2 is a little more sneaky than just outright avoidance. These are the little crutches we use to feel safer while we're in a scary situation. And they seem totally harmless, but they can be just as damaging. For instance, maybe you always have to carry a water bottle in case of a panic attack, or you only sit near an exit. Well, what message does that send your brain? It says, I can only get through this if I have my little safety net. It completely undermines your confidence that you can actually cope all on your own. Okay, the third behavior is performing rituals. And, we often link this to OCD, but lots of people use small, repetitive actions to try and neutralize a fearful thought or prevent something bad from happening. I mean, checking the stove 5 times, sure, it brings a brief moment of relief. But in the long run, you're just strengthening the belief that without that ritual, something terrible will happen. You pretty much become a slave to the compulsion. Okay, so we've covered the actions. Now let's get to the source of it all, our thoughts. Here are 4 super common mental traps, or cognitive distortions, as they're called in the manual, that mentally resilient people learn how to sidestep. Oh yeah, this is a classic. Catastrophizing is when our mind automatically jumps to the absolute worst-case scenario and then treats it like it's a 100% certainty. A tiny mistake suddenly becomes a life-ending disaster. You see, the anxious mind doesn't just predict a bad outcome, it predicts an unbearable one. A resilient mindset, on the other hand, it assesses the situation realistically. It knows how to separate the feeling of discomfort from the prediction of total catastrophe. This mental trap is a really close cousin of catastrophizing. This is when we totally miscalculate the odds. Our anxious feelings convince us that a really rare negative event is actually highly probable. Our feelings can make a threat seem so much more real than it actually is. Think about the fear of flying. It can make our brain conclude that it's incredibly dangerous, even when all the statistics say the exact opposite. We start mistaking the intensity of our feeling for actual factual evidence. Now, let's talk about two mental traps that are often linked together. These are all about how we interpret our feelings and our experiences, and resilient people learn to be really, really careful with both. So first up is reasoning from our emotions. This is basically treating your feelings as facts. I feel like a failure, therefore I am a failure. It's such a powerful trap. And second, there's ignoring the positive. This is like being a detective who just throws out any evidence that doesn't fit their negative theory. Someone praises your work, and you immediately think, oh, they're just being nice. You're actively discounting anything that challenges your negative view of yourself.
All right, for our final section, let's look at two big overarching mindsets. So we've covered behaviors and thoughts to avoid. Now let's see what resilient people try to build instead.
So here are the last two things to avoid: perfectionism and those nagging shoulds. Perfectionism tells you that any mistake, no matter how small, is a catastrophe, which just paralyzes you from taking any necessary risks. And shoulds? Well, those are the rigid internal rules we have. I should be able to handle this, or I shouldn't feel this anxious. Honestly, they're just a recipe for self-criticism and shame, not resilience. So what's the alternative to these 9 habits? Well, it's actually a pretty simple 3-step process. First, just acknowledge the anxious feeling without judging it. Second, challenge the thought behind it. What's the actual evidence here? And third, instead of avoiding, just take one small step forward. And that's really the crucial point here. Resilience isn't something you're born with. It is a skill that you build. And it starts not by doing more, but by choosing to do less of what holds you back. It's about recognizing the anxiety fuel in your own life and making a conscious choice to stop pouring it on the fire. So what will you choose?